England's worst military defeat in Ireland happened because one man understood something the Crown never did. He knew their tactics, he knew their weaknesses, and he knew exactly where to trap them. 4,000 professional soldiers marching in perfect formation toward a narrow river crossing. An entire army is about to be slaughtered. The man waiting for them had been raised by the English crown, educated in their courts, given his title by Queen Elizabeth herself. And on August 14th, 1598, Hugh O'Neill, Earl of Tyrone, was about to hand England a disaster it would never forget. The soldiers are confident, they're professionals. They have artillery, cavalry, and the best weapons money can buy. Their commander, Sir Henry Bagenal, is one of the most experienced officers in Ireland. He's relieved garrisons before. He fought the Irish rebels and won. This march is supposed to be routine. 6 miles to a besieged fort, a supply run, nothing more. But the man waiting at the ford isn't some wild chieftain leading farmers with pitchforks. He's Hugh O'Neill, the Earl of Tyrone. And he's about to prove that underestimating him is the last mistake an English army will ever make. This is the story of 2 battles, 4 years apart, that shook an empire to its core. This is the story of how one man turned England's colonial ambitions into a nightmare. This is the story of the Ford of the Biscuits and the Battle of Yellow Ford. But to understand why this moment at Yellow Ford was so devastating, you have to understand how we got here. You have to understand the man who engineered it. Hugh O'Neill wasn't your typical Irish rebel. He wasn't born in the bogs fighting English invaders from childhood. He was born into power, raised in England, and given his title by Queen Elizabeth I herself. O'Neill spent his teenage years in the English court. He learned their language, studied their tactics, and absorbed their culture. The English thought they were creating a loyal Irish lord who would help them control the north. What they actually created was someone who understood exactly how they thought, how they fought, and how to beat them. By the 1590s, O'Neill was back in Ireland, holding the title of Earl of Tyrone. To the English, he seemed like the perfect success story. A civilized Irishman who could be trusted to keep order in the north. But O'Neill saw something they didn't. He saw his people being crushed under Elizabeth's plantation policy. He saw Irish land stolen and given to English and Scottish settlers. He saw a future where Ireland would be nothing but a colony, its culture erased, its people subjugated. The choice he faced was impossible. Stay loyal to the crown that gave him his title and watch his world disappear, or risk everything to fight back. In 1593, O'Neill made his decision. He declared open rebellion, and Elizabeth took it personally. They had no idea what was coming. She had trusted him, she had educated him, she had given him power, and now he was using everything she taught him against her. The 9 Years' War had begun, and it would become the most expensive, bloody, and humiliating conflict England fought in the 16th century. But O'Neill had a problem. He wasn't just fighting a war, he was fighting the way wars had always been fought in Ireland. Traditional Irish tactics relied on quick raids, cattle theft, and avoiding pitched battles. That worked fine against other Irish clans, but it wouldn't work against a modern European army. O'Neill knew that if he was going to win, he had to change everything. And he was about to do exactly that. He began modernizing his forces. He imported muskets and hired foreign mercenaries to train his men in their use. He studied pike formations, the same kind that Spanish and English armies used on European battlefields. He turned his fighters into something the English had never faced before. A hybrid force that combined the mobility and terrain knowledge of Irish warriors with the discipline and firepower of a professional army. The English were about to find out just how effective that combination could be. They were about to get a brutal lesson. By 1594, English forces in Ireland had a serious problem. Their garrison at a strategic castle in the northwest was surrounded, starving, and running out of ammunition. It was a strong point they couldn't afford to lose. If it fell, English control over the entire region would collapse. A massive supply convoy, packed with gunpowder, weapons, and barrels of hardtack biscuits, was their only lifeline. O'Neill was about to turn that lifeline into a noose. The convoy left with 1,500 soldiers protecting it. Their commander was Sir Henry Duke, a competent officer who had fought in Ireland before. He knew the convoy was vulnerable, but he had numbers and firepower. Irish rebels had never been able to stand against a force this size in open combat. The plan was simple: march to the castle, deliver the supplies, march back, quick and efficient. Duke's mistake was assuming this was still the old kind of war. This was a new kind of war, and O'Neill had picked the perfect place to demonstrate it. The route to the besieged garrison required crossing a river at a narrow ford. The ground around it was boggy and soft, the kind of terrain where heavy supply wagons would struggle. It was a choke point, a place where numbers didn't matter because only a few men could move through at once. O'Neill scouted it weeks in advance. He positioned his forces in the hills and woods overlooking the crossing, and then he waited. The trap was set. When Duke's convoy reached the ford, everything seemed quiet, too quiet. The soldiers started crossing, wagons creaking as they navigated the soft ground, and then the Irish attacked. It wasn't a wild charge. It was coordinated, disciplined, and devastating. Musket fire erupted from the concealed positions, cutting down soldiers before they could form up. The narrow ford became a killing ground. Men who tried to push forward got stuck in the bog. Men who tried to retreat crashed into the soldiers behind them. The supply wagons, those precious barrels of gunpowder and biscuits, were trapped in the middle of the chaos. Duke tried to rally his men, but there was nowhere to rally to. The Irish had turned the terrain itself into a weapon. His soldiers, trained for open field combat, couldn't maneuver. His numbers meant nothing when they couldn't be brought to bear. The professional formation dissolved into panic. Within hours, the convoy was shattered. The English retreated in disorder, leaving behind their supplies, their dead, and their illusions of superiority. The Irish captured everything: weapons, ammunition, and yes, those barrels of hardtack biscuits that would give the battle its memorable name. For months afterward, O'Neill's forces ate English rations and used English gunpowder. The Ford of the Biscuits wasn't just a tactical victory, it was a humiliation, and it was a message. This rebellion wasn't going to be crushed in a few months. The Irish had just beaten a professional English force using strategy, discipline, and modern weapons. The rules had changed. England was about to learn just how much. If you're enjoying this deep dive into one of history's most incredible underdog victories, make sure to hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you don't miss our next video. And drop a comment below telling us what historical battle you want to see covered next. Now, let's talk about what happened after the biscuits ran out. After the Ford of the Biscuits, Elizabeth I sent wave after wave of commanders to crush O'Neill. Each one promised to end the rebellion in months. Each one came home defeated, or didn't come home at all. By 1598, the Queen had had enough. She was sending her best general and the largest army Ireland had ever seen. Those 4 years between the battles were a nightmare for England. O'Neill didn't just win the Ford of the Biscuits and disappear. He used the momentum to unite other Irish lords under his banner. He controlled the Northern Territories. He raided English-held areas across the island. And every time the English sent an expedition to stop him, he vanished into the countryside, reappeared somewhere unexpected, and won again. The pattern was maddening. English armies would march out with banners flying and drums beating. They'd burn a few villages, declare victory, and march back to their garrison. And then O'Neill would strike where they weren't, capture their supplies, cut off their reinforcements, and make them look like fools. He was fighting a modern guerrilla war 300 years before the term existed. Every victory made him stronger. Every English defeat made them more desperate. For Elizabeth, this was more than a military problem. It was personal. O'Neill had been her adopted son, her civilized Irish lord, her proof that the English colonial project could work. His rebellion was a direct insult to her judgment and her authority. She poured money into Ireland. She sent army after army. Nothing worked. Each failed expedition made the others worse. Soldiers didn't want to go to Ireland. It was a death sentence. Officers knew that taking command there could destroy their careers, and the costs kept climbing. The 9 Years' War was bleeding England's treasury dry, and there was no end in sight. The Queen's patience was running out. Something had to change. By 1598, Elizabeth decided to break the stalemate. She chose Sir Henry Bagenal to lead the largest expeditionary force yet sent to Ireland. 4,000 men, artillery, cavalry, and enough supplies to sustain a major campaign. Bagenal was experienced, respected, and motivated. He had fought in Ireland for years. He knew the terrain, he knew the enemy, and he hated O'Neill. The hatred was personal. Years earlier, O'Neill had eloped with Bagenal's sister, Mabel. In the rigid social hierarchy of the time, this was a massive insult. It was a powerful Irish lord stealing an English noblewoman. Bagenal never forgave him. Now he had 4,000 soldiers and royal authorization to make O'Neill pay for it. This was more than a military mission. It was revenge. The mission was straightforward. March from the main English stronghold to Blackwater Fort, a garrison under siege by Irish forces. Relieve the fort, resupply it, and use it as a base to crush O'Neill's rebellion once and for all. 6 miles. 1 day's march. Simple. Bagenal knew O'Neill would try to stop him. The march would pass through hostile territory, and there would be ambushes, but he had numbers, firepower, and professional soldiers. The Irish couldn't stand against a force this size in open combat. At least, that's what every English commander before him had thought. They were all wrong, and Bagenal was about to join them. O'Neill had been preparing for this moment since the Ford of the Biscuits. He knew the English would come eventually. He knew they'd bring a massive army, and he knew exactly where they'd have to go. The route from the English stronghold to Blackwater Fort passed through narrow terrain, boggy ground, and a river crossing at a place called Yellow Ford, another choke point, another perfect killing ground. He spent weeks scouting the area, positioning his forces, and preparing the ambush. He dug trenches, he created concealed firing positions. He mapped out every escape route and every angle of approach. By the time Bagenal's army left town on August 14th, O'Neill was ready. The English were marching into the most sophisticated ambush of the 16th century, and they had no idea what was waiting. August 14th, 1598. Sir Henry Bagenal's army of 4,000 men left at dawn. They had 6 miles to march to Blackwater Fort. By sunset, more than half of them would be dead, and Bagenal himself would never see another sunrise. The morning started with confidence. The English soldiers marched in formation, their armor gleaming, their banners flying. They had artillery pieces rolling on wooden carriages, cavalry riding on the flanks, and supply wagons in the center. It was an impressive display of military power, a modern European army on the move. The soldiers believed they were unstoppable. They believed wrong. The terrain immediately became a problem. The road to Blackwater Fort wasn't a road at all. It was barely a path, winding through boggy ground and thick vegetation. The artillery slowed them down. The supply wagons got stuck in the soft earth. The tight column formation meant they couldn't spread out, couldn't see the hills on either side, and couldn't respond quickly to threats. Every step forward took them deeper into O'Neill's trap. Within an hour, Irish skirmishers appeared. Small groups of fighters who fired a few shots and disappeared into the landscape. They weren't attacking, they were harassing, slowing the march even more, making the English nervous. Bagenal pushed forward. This was expected. A few rebels trying to delay the inevitable. He'd seen this before. He kept marching. That was his mistake. By mid-morning, the English vanguard reached Yellow Ford. The river crossing was narrow and treacherous. Boggy ground on both sides meant the army would have to funnel through a tight space. It was exactly the kind of place commanders dreaded, but there was no other route. They had to cross. Bagenal ordered the advance. The soldiers started moving forward. That's when O'Neill sprang the trap. The Irish attacked from concealed positions on both sides of the ford. Hundreds of muskets fired at once. The English vanguard collapsed under the sudden, concentrated fire. Men went down screaming. Officers tried to form defensive lines, but there was nowhere to form them. The terrain was too narrow. The Irish fire was too heavy. The English couldn't push forward and couldn't retreat without crashing into their own men behind them. The perfect formation became a death trap. Bagenal tried to respond. He ordered his artillery forward to blast the Irish positions. The cannon crews struggled to maneuver the heavy guns through the bog. And then disaster struck. An English ammunition cart exploded. No one knows for certain what caused it. Maybe it was a lucky Irish shot. Maybe it was sabotage. Maybe it was just an accident in the chaos. Whatever the reason, the explosion was catastrophic. The blast killed dozens of soldiers instantly. It destroyed precious gunpowder, and it created absolute panic. Men thought the Irish had some new weapon. They thought they were all about to die. Discipline started to crack. The professional army began to fracture. Bagenal tried to rally them. He rode up and down the column, shouting orders, trying to restore order. But the Irish fire never stopped. The musket balls kept coming. English soldiers fell by the dozen. The cavalry tried to charge the Irish positions and got bogged down in the soft ground, picked off by Irish gunfire before they could close the distance. Horses screamed. Men died. The battle that was supposed to be a routine march had become a slaughter. And the English still hadn't reached Blackwater Fort. They never would. By mid-afternoon, Bagenal's proud army had become a terrified mob. Men threw down their weapons and ran. Others surrendered, begging for mercy. And somewhere in the chaos, Sir Henry Bagenal took a musket ball to the head. The Queen's best general was dead, and her army was being slaughtered. Bagenal's death broke whatever was left of English morale. There was no one to give orders. No one to coordinate the retreat. The soldiers simply fled. They abandoned their artillery. They abandoned their supplies. They abandoned their wounded. Every man ran for his life, and the Irish pursued them for miles, cutting down anyone too slow to escape. The numbers were staggering. Out of 4,000 English soldiers, more than 2,000 died at Yellow Ford or in the panicked retreat that followed. Half the army, gone. Every piece of artillery was captured. Every supply wagon taken. It was the worst English military defeat in Ireland in the entire 16th century. It was worse than any medieval disaster. And it was planned, executed, and won by a man the English had educated. The news reached Dublin and created absolute panic. English held garrisons across Ireland, prepared for sieges. Colonists barricaded themselves in their homes. The fear was real and justified. If O'Neill could destroy an army that size, what couldn't he do? For a brief moment, it looked like the English might be driven from Ireland entirely. In London, Elizabeth received the news in her palace. She was furious, grieving, and terrified. Bagenal was dead. The army was destroyed. Her Irish policy was in ruins. She would spend the next years pouring even more resources into Ireland, sending even larger armies, trying desperately to salvage her colonial project. But Yellow Ford had proven something she couldn't ignore. The Irish could win. For O'Neill, Yellow Ford was his greatest triumph. He had beaten the English twice now, using the same tactics at similar terrain with devastating effectiveness. He controlled most of the northern territories. Other Irish lords were joining his cause. Spain was considering sending support. The rebellion that started in 1593 had become a genuine threat to English power in Ireland. The impossible was happening. The church bells of Dublin rang in mourning. England had lost an army, a general, and its illusion of invincibility. Hugh O'Neill had done the impossible, not once, but twice. Yellow Ford became a legend, proof that empires could bleed. The war would grind on for 5 more years, and O'Neill would eventually surrender after Elizabeth's death, spending his final years in exile in Rome. But Yellow Ford remained, a symbol that leadership, strategy, and knowing your enemy better than they know themselves can overcome any odds. If you found this story as incredible as we did, hit that share button and spread the word about history's greatest underdog victories. And make sure you're subscribed so you don't miss our next deep dive into the battles that changed the world. We've got more incredible stories coming, and trust us, you won't want to miss them. Let us know in the comments what battle you'd like to see next. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next one.